So, hello everyone. Thank you for sitting through those technical difficulties. This is the third annual Transgender Awareness Panel. My name is Amber Briggle. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm also okay with they, them. This is the third year that I've moderated it. The first year that we've gone virtual, however, and so thank you very much for your patience, especially to our panelists who've been sitting on here since 1:30 while we're trying to work out all the technical glitches. This is National Transgender Awareness Week. It runs annually from November 13th through the 19th, and on November 20th is our National Transgender Day of Remembrance. That is a day when all around the world we honor and recognize those lives that were lost due to anti-transgender violence. It's a very somber day for the trans community. It's also a day of remembering how resilient the trans community is. And so there are going to be, I know right here in Denton, Texas, it's a little town north of Dallas. We do something every year right here in Denton. Outreach Denton and the University of North Texas Pride Alliance are hosting an event virtually. I did post that event to my Facebook page and also to the event page for this event. I will continue to keep you updated on that, but I encourage you to find an event, whether it's in your area or something else, because a lot of them are going to be online and virtual. So every year, my church, the Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, hosts a panel that I've been so fortunate to moderate. In years past, it has been obviously at the church. You can see this building behind me. Um, this year is different, obviously, but it's such a great opportunity because I get to invite some amazing panelists from across the country, which I will introduce you to in just a moment. And it gives all y'all an opportunity to join us online as well. So no matter where in the world you are, we are glad that you are here with us today. Um, before I introduce the panelists, I just want to tell you kind of how the format is supposed to work. Fingers crossed. We have got the worst of the technical glitches behind us. So we are all on Zoom. And that was the issue, trying to figure out how to stream from Zoom to Facebook Live. This event is being live streamed on the Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship page. I encourage you to watch that live stream there so we can keep all of our questions in the same place. But we're asking and inviting you all as the viewers and guests here to post your comments and your questions in the chat box below the video. We have two amazing ushers, Marissa and Shannon, who will be collecting those questions and putting them in the chat box here for us, myself, the moderator, and our four panelists, and then I'll kind of divvy up the questions that way. So ask your questions on Facebook Live. The ushers will collect them and pop them over here. Okay? So thank you again. And now I'd like to introduce the panelists. I'd like to recognize April Madsen. April identifies as Two-Spirit and is an activist and organizer originally from the Black Hills, currently living in Vermilion, South Dakota. April is Lakota and Athabascan and has two children, ages 6 and 7. They are the executive director of a nonprofit called Rock the Res and a board member on the Transformation Project of South Dakota. They're also working with their partner to create a documentary about the trans experience in music. And they are currently working from home as an assistant for a law office and a full-time, unqualified second grade and kindergarten teacher. April, I can totally relate. I've got a seventh grader and third grader at home, so 100%. We also have today with us Gavin Grimm, who's a 21-year-old transgender activist and present client of the ACLU, as well as a member of the ACLU Board of Directors. He is currently represented by the ACLU in a discrimination lawsuit brought against his high school in 2015 after they banned him from the boys' bathroom on the basis of being transgender. And he was set to have his case heard at the Supreme Court before it was actually sent back to the lower courts, where their favorable ruling still stands and is federal law. And Gavin, I hope you can give us an update on your case at some point during the panel, because it's been bounced around quite a bit, and it's still like a landmark case, and I'm super proud of you. So I'd love to hear an update on that. Jay Luna is a 37-year-old native Texan and a member of the Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. He's a family man who loves the outdoors. He grew up in Nacogdoches. Is that how you say it? I'm not originally from Texas. Is that right, Jay?
That's right. Good job.
Nacogdoches, and moved to the DFW area at the age of 20. At the age of 26, he met his future bride, and after lots of ups and downs, he is now a loving husband, stepfather, and pops of two precious grandchildren. Jay loves camping, hiking, and most everything outdoors. nature has a way of providing him peace and tranquility in an otherwise hectic world. And after many years of struggling with his identity and sexuality, a combination of drugs, eating disorders, and self harm, he is now proud to have overcome those obstacles and be the trans man he is today. Jay is all of these things and so much more. And you are so sweet for joining us today, Jay. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
then lastly, we have Stella Keating. Stella is a 16-year-old future politician who is empowering young people across the country to create systemic change. She began her political career at 10 years old when she spoke passionately about safety and inclusion at her local school board meeting. Since then, her platform has grown to include education, equality, and equity for all young people. As part of this, Stella launched in the spring of 2020, good time to launch a new project, Stella, if you're sitting at home, a 6-episode podcast series called Gimme the Mic that focused on elevating youth voices and perspectives around racial, disability, and queer justice. You can listen to her pod at gimmethemicpodcast.com. Beyond politics, Stella is deeply interested in the judicial system and plans to attend law school as part of her journey to becoming an elected official. Stella loves reading, writing, sports, playing the violin, and doing artistic DIY projects. She also loves travel. Washington, D.C., and Costa Rica are her favorite trips so far. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. So we're going to start with, I've got a couple of questions just to kind of get us talking. And I wanted to actually, before I ask, I'm going to ask this question, but when I turn it over to you, if you could also take a few moments to just introduce yourself, just within a few minutes. We'd love to hear more about you. And then your first question, and Stella, I'd like to start with you since you're the political junkie. I really want to talk about the election. So this was enormous. This was huge, and there were elections at the local, state, and national level. So I just kind of want to hear from all of our panelists. What are your thoughts on your election, on this election? What are your hopes for the next 4 years? What happened locally? Just kind of whatever it is you want to talk about, something big happened, and I want to hear your thoughts. So Stella, let's start with you. If you could introduce yourself and then talk about November 3rd.
Awesome. Hi, my name's Stella. I use she, her pronouns. The bio basically says it all. I am super into politics. I was speaking to my school board, and actually the first time that I ever did public speaking like that before was also the first time that I came out like that, which was very exciting for me. And along with all those things, and with school, I've been really involved in my school with a lot of things. And I've tried to come out as many times as possible to my school so that I can also bring an acceptance to other people and my peers. And yeah, that's kind of what I love to do. And I want to be a lawyer someday, and I want to also fight for my people and my fellow queer people. And so, but going on to my feelings about the election, it was really scary that night. It was really intense, and I just, that entire week really, and I was really scared because we already had 4 years of being targeted by this administration, and it was so scary to think about another 4 years with that. And I just am so thankful that we are finally out of the woods and that we are here now. And I just am so proud. And I actually totally forgot something that was not in my bio. I am a Genderqueer Champion. So a few years ago, February 2017 or 18, one or the other, I was a founding champion of the Genderqueer Project. And the Genderqueer Project is about telling stories of transgender youth, but about who they are, not what they are. And so I am a violinist. I am a future politician, but I'm going to call myself a current politician because, why not? And so that's what I'm also part of. You can learn more about Genderqueer at genderqueer.org. We've done some really powerful work and really amazing work, and continue to every single day.
Thanks, Stella. And your work, that's actually how you got invited to this, because I wrote to Jen at Genderqueer, and I'm like, I need a youth voice for this. And she goes, I know exactly the person. She said, Stella's going to be an amazing panelist. And of course you are already. My son also, have you met Max? I know y'all had like a Zoom call. all the
We did
champions.
once. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, and we're all in a group chat together as well. And so
that's
I've
great.
talked to Max a few times. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So for those watching at home, my son Max is also a Genderqueer Champion, and it's like it's so rad to see him like step into his own way of advocating for trans youth in a way that feels comfortable for him. So Stella, like really the gender, all y'all Genderqueer Champions are just like amazing. So thank you for your reflections on that. Jay, let's bounce over to you. Talk about yourself, and if you could talk about the election a little bit, so what are some of your reflections?
Oh, sure. Yeah, the bio definitely said a lot in there. But again, my name is Jay. I'm 37. Um, I have a wife, two stepdaughters, two grandbabies that I love dearly. And let's see, you covered us from Nacogdoches. You did a very good job of saying that, by the way. It's not the easiest word to say. Basically, I've been out as trans for about 8.5 years now. I've had top surgery. Um, let's see, I work at one of the state parks in Texas, hence me loving the outdoors. Also manage rental properties. I'm a caretaker for my wife. She's got some chronic illnesses, so I see to her as well. Um, yeah, and then about the election, I'll tell you, Texas really stepped it up this year. Came close to becoming a blue state, which is probably the first time in a really, I don't know if that's ever happened, honestly. Um, and then having, and then having Biden thank his transgender and the LGBT community in his speech. I mean, how amazing is that?
Wasn't that amazing? I
Yes.
know. So my husband was a poll worker. And so, when the president-elect is like thanking in his speech, like, thanks to the poll workers, I'm smacking his arm. I'm like, he's talking about you. And then he goes on to talk about this diverse coalition. And he said the word transgender. Like, he didn't have to say that. Like, that was an intentional choice that
Hmm.
and it was very moving to me as the parent of a trans person. But how did that feel to you as a transgender person yourself to hear yourself be recognized in such a positive way from the future president?
Definitely. It felt amazing because, a lot of the times when we see stuff on the news about transgender, it's a lot of, killings. And I mean, we've had a lot of murders this year, as in the past as well. And so it was enlightening, really. I mean, it was really nice.
Yeah, good. Thank you for those thoughts.
Welcome. Mhm.
Um, April, you're up next. I'd love to hear more about you, the work that you do in South Dakota, your experience as a two-spirit individual, and your thoughts on this election.
Yeah. Hi, I'm April. I use they, them, theirs pronouns. Um, as Amber said earlier, I'm the executive director of an organization called Rock the Res. We are a week-long music camp that takes place on the Pine Ridge Reservation here in South Dakota for girls, trans youth, gender nonconforming. We serve a community that doesn't have a lot of access to art programs or music. And so we did camp virtual this year, which was really difficult and also really missing that community a lot. But we're continuing to work on it. And I did teach a workshop this year on being two-spirit and just talked about that. Non-binary might be a term that people are more familiar with, and two-spirit is specifically for Indigenous people. It's kind of embracing both a male perspective and a female perspective and holding that in your body and in your soul, and walking in that way. And so I myself have been trying to claim it and also share it with other people. I think it's really important to kind of honor it and understand it before sharing it outwardly. But I think representation is really important as well. So the election, though, it was very exciting. It was really scary. My partner is a trans man, and my children are very active in understanding the trans identity as well. And so they were really involved, and we were all watching, and every single day they would ask, who got elected, who got elected? And I don't know a ton about politics. This is a system that wasn't necessarily built for my people, Native American people. And so just now getting into it, I'm newly on the Transformation Project board, advocacy network board. And so I'm learning all the time. I'm learning every day. And, Stella, if you want to call me sometime and teach me some stuff, that'd be great.
It would be an honor.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Gavin, you're up next. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Virginia. I'd love to hear a little bit more, if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself, maybe update us a little bit more about your court case, and then talk about the election and your thoughts on some of that.
Absolutely. The introduction covered a lot of the main bits. I'm 21 years old. I live in Virginia. I am both transgender and bisexual, and so I interact in the community from both of those lenses. But my focus has, primarily been on trans politics and issues and things of that nature. As far as the current standing of my case, we are basically the Supreme Court has a certain amount of time that they can take to make a decision on whether or not to hear my case before the Supreme Court again. That's where we stand right now. We got a positive ruling in the Fourth Circuit, and the school board seems to plan to, or they had appealed that, and so now what's left is to wait to hear if we go back to the Supreme Court or not. And of course, that looks a lot different now than it did when we were staring down that possibility in 2018. I should note that it was one of the very first things that the Trump administration did when they moved into office was eliminate the guidance that our argument in part rested on, which was going to bring us before the Supreme Court. That was eradicated almost immediately in a fairly direct attack on our community, an explicitly direct attack, I should say. So yeah, the world's a lot different now, and the Supreme Court looks a lot different, and the stakes are a lot different. But that's where we are. We're waiting for their move. Going into talking about the election, I wish I could be more excited than I am. I'm of course really happy that Joe Biden won. He is, I think, clearly the lesser of two evils, if we're going to paint it that way. But I'm nervous because he doesn't have a terribly progressive history, and I don't know how hard he will fight for us until he proves it. So it's a great start to say our names and things like that, or say the label or the word of our community, and use us in our language in a visible way. It's a great start, but there's a lot of proving to do in my perspective before I can feel like we are going to be safe or protected or fought for, or any of those things, because, and especially given that certainly with aspects of our community, facing, issues within the criminal justice system or racial equity, for example, I really hope he impresses me in those areas. I hope he does. So that's kind of where I'm at with the election. Very, very thankful that Joe Biden won, and I'm going to hold his feet to the fire just as firmly as I did Donald Trump's, and he's got a lot of proving to do to show that he really is going to be the guy for us.
Thanks, Gavin. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. I want to kind of stay on this topic too about about the advocacy that you've done for the trans community as a whole with your case. I don't imagine that when you sued your high school, I don't imagine that when you just assumed you could use the boys' bathroom at high school that you'd end up being here today, right? And so if we could stick with this for a little while longer, just talk a little bit more about this. Like, can you tell me kind of what was your transition in high school? Like, you transitioned when publicly you socially transitioned when you were 17 years old. Is that right?
No, I was 14.
You're 14. Okay. And you were going to high school and using the bathroom, and then all of a sudden someone thought that was a bad idea, and so you fought for your rights. And I'm just kind of curious if you could, I guess I'm looking at it from like my own, as the parent of a transgender child. Again, I never pictured that I would be in this place. I just want the best for my kid. And suddenly now I'm like this, international recognized advocate. And it's really, it's a very sort of trippy sort of place to be in. And I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about kind of not necessarily your transition to becoming the trans man that you are today, but your transition as an advocate and an activist for the trans community. Did that come naturally to you? And do you feel like the work that you have done and continue to do is benefiting the trans community, or you're just doing it because God damn it, you just got to do it? Like, can you just tell me a little bit more about kind of your experience as an advocate and an activist?
Well, to summarize, I'm going to summarize a couple of key facts in the case first for those who may not be aware, just quickly. I was in my freshman year of high school. I had not yet transitioned and attended the same high school in my sophomore year that I had the year before, previous to transitioning. In sophomore year, I transitioned over the summer between freshman and sophomore year, returned as a sophomore as myself, as Gavin Grimm as a boy. And for a period of about 7 weeks, I was in fact permitted to use the boys' restrooms. I never had any issues, never had any altercations. There were definitely stories that people told and rumors about encounters they had had with me, but it was just not true at all. The only interaction I had with anyone in the bathroom was an underclassman asking if I liked his socks. And I did. So for a period of 7 weeks, I was just being myself and not having any issues whatsoever. But then some faculty members, in particular, one of the gym teachers, decided to incite controversy by going to the parents and complaining, talking to the kids about it, things like that, until it was an issue. And a Facebook post went around that said, show up to the school board meeting and get that girl out of the boys' bathroom. Now, it was my school board that decided that it was going to be appropriate to have a public meeting open to every member of the public about where I use the bathroom, genitals, bathroom usage. All of those topics were on the board in a public forum of within my community. They did not tell myself or my family that it was happening. They were trying to get it, they were hoping we wouldn't know and wouldn't show up, quite frankly. But we found out last minute, and I went there and I spoke. And then there was another meeting of the same ilk a month later. And again, I went and I spoke. And they ultimately voted to ban me from the boys' bathroom and then enter ACLU. I partner with them. We sue the school. We're still suing the school 5 years later. We brought the suit in 2015. It's 2020 now. So how far we've come. In terms of how I saw my role or how it evolved, how this came to be in general, I have always been someone who had to make space to be in a room. There's never ever been space for me or people like me, whatever that meant for me at various points of my development. I have always been outcasted, teased, harassed, especially in the public school system. I have always been failed by them. I have been, bullied by teachers, bullied by students. Nothing has ever been done to protect me at any step of the way through preschool to high school. I have always known that within the school system, I was alone and I was fighting for myself. And it's not fair, but that was what my reality was. And so when the school banned me from the boys' bathroom, I didn't really have any particular conflict about it at all. I said, well, this is exactly what I've always dealt with, being rejected and outcasted in this way and not supported and not protected. So just like I always have done, I'm going to make space for myself and I'm going to do what I view as the right thing. It was a principle thing. It was a matter of, they can't do that. That's wrong. That's illegal. And I'm certainly not going to spend the rest of my high school career being forced to use the bathroom in a broom closet. If there's anything I can do to do something about it. It was never a question of whether or not I wanted to. I mean, the fact of the matter was the only avenue we had left was legal action. And so that's the avenue I took. It didn't feel like much of a choice. It was pretty immediate that I saw that the case was about a lot more than just my using the bathroom, and that it had legal significance on a at one point federal level. And it was, I mean, really pretty immediately that my view of my role evolved away from myself as an individual fighting for what I deserved, and moving into the space of myself as an individual taking the privilege and the gift ultimately of my discrimination. And I say that because it gave me the ability to bring this issue forward to take this and look at it as a gift and a privilege rather than as a hardship, and realize that this was a vehicle that had the possibility to incite real change and on the legal level and the legal system itself. And so I really just saw myself as an avatar for a conversation that was far greater than myself, far more important than myself. I mean, really, I'm not, I was in the right place at the right time, you might say. I'm not particularly unique or any of these things. I just got really lucky in the long run and was given this incredible gift of visibility, and have been trying to not take that for granted ever since.
Thank you. And I followed your story from the very start, because my son transitioned in first grade, um, which was, gosh, he's in seventh grade now. So when your case, when you were suing, like, was right, so that was 2015 when you were suing your school district, and we were starting to hear the word about that. Like, my son was also like trying to get into the bathroom at school. So I've been following your story for a really long time, and I really just want to honor you and thank you for. I mean, you are such an articulate and well thought advocate and speaker, and I'm sorry that this has been thrust upon you, and at the same time, I can't imagine a better person for this role. So sorry and thanks, I guess. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you, Stella. I kind of to kind of piggyback off of that. So now you're 16. You spoke with your at your school district when you were 10, trying to fight for better safety and inclusion. What has your experience been like? Do you feel accepted in your school? Do you feel like you have had like this uphill battle like Gavin has had? The advocacy work that you're doing. I love what you said earlier, that you come out as often as possible to make things easier for students. That you just kind of talk about that a little bit too. What's that experience like for you at high school?
Yeah, well, I've had a fantastic high school experience, and Gavin and I met a few years ago at a annual conference that happens here in Washington. I don't remember how many years ago, but we've also been following, my family's been following Gavin's story and his journey through moving through all the courts, and it's just been so powerful. And Gavin, I just want to tell you, you have been one of my biggest heroes, and you just have inspired me for so many years. And I just and to be able to see you again, even if it's on Zoom, is just really fantastic. And so, but yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, you're just one of my biggest inspirers for what I do every day. But my high school experience has been really fantastic. It's felt good and normal, ish, right? It doesn't help, being trans is still somewhat weird in its own kind of way, but I've always been really accepted. And even in elementary school, I came out when I was in fourth grade or going into fourth grade. And so I've been out for a really long time now. And, it's never really been an uphill battle for me. I think it's been more of an emotional uphill battle, just because even for me, for the first year of my coming out, it took a lot even for me to go into the girls' bathroom. So all of fourth grade, I was still using the boys' bathroom because I just wasn't ready. And so, but all of my classmates were all super, they never said anything, which is fantastic. And so I've had a really fantastic experience, but I've also, there have been issues with the bathroom outside of school and in legislation. And so in 2016, I don't think that's right, but my mom will probably text me and tell me otherwise. In 2016, there was a initiative called Initiative 1616, which basically said that I couldn't use the women's bathroom. And so that was an entire year of fighting to try and get that not on the ballot. And it came back again in 2017, but that was one of the hardest uphill battles ever for me and for my family and just for my community. And so we were doing doorbelling every single weekend. We would go to the same place and I would hang behind because my parents were also scared for me. I really wanted to go doorbelling. And I eventually did. And my mom is actually now on the school board that I testified in front of 6 years ago. She was, she's almost 7 years ago, actually. This December, she will have been on the board for a whole year, which is super exciting. But you know, I did eventually get to doorbell, but they were just so scared for me of like, what does this mean? Like, who could hurt you? And this, you know, it's been really scary with that. But I will say, like, I had a PE class last year. I'm a sophomore now, and I had a PE class last year that there was a swimming, thing, and the first day of school, I was like, I said to my PE teacher, I said, hey, I'm not comfortable with wearing a one piece because I'm not yet old enough to have bottom surgery. And so, and he was like, okay, great. You can take all these steps. Let's make sure that you're as comfortable as possible and that you can still exercise. And so that was really fantastic to have. And the fact that there are teachers out there who are willing to do that is really amazing. But also on the contrary, I had a science teacher that came to me when I was in 8th grade to ask me about gender identity and for teaching. And that's only kind of a negative thing because she's the teacher and really should know these things as well, right? And she should already know this, but also the fact that she was comfortable coming to me was kind of great. You know, there's like this kind of, you know, negative and positive, but at the same time, she's the one teaching this, she should know this for sure. And so, yeah, I think I've had the privilege because I live in such a progressive area and state. I don't have to be as concerned. I don't have to worry as much as Gavin does, as April does, or even Jay. Like, I don't have to worry as much. I've been really, really lucky. I've had a few friends who they've had to go to court to get their name changed statewide. And I haven't had to do that because I have two really accepting parents who love me. And I live in a fantastic state. Even though they live in the same state, they don't have two parents that accept them. And so they have to take extra steps than I do. And I just think, you know, it's just ridiculous. And I really hope that, as Gavin said, I really need to see the next administration to come through and to actually act on what they say that they will.
Thank you, Stella. April, I'd like to move on to you next. We have a couple of questions that have been coming in about people being fearful of transitional healthcare being banned for transgender youth. And I really want to lift up the work that y'all in South Dakota have been doing. There's at last count, there were at least 46 anti-transgender bills working their way through various state legislatures, not just South Dakota. You know, Idaho passed something recently. There's things been filed in Tennessee and in the Carolinas and in Arizona. The Texas legislature is set to reconvene in 2021, and we are certain to see things filed here as well. And South Dakota really seems to be kind of a testing ground for a lot of like the worst of the worst of these bills, right? So it's like, you know, different like anti-LGBTQ organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, like they craft these bills. Like no legislator is sitting there like, how can I scheme against the trans community? I'm going to write this thing. Like no, ADF like brings them these bills and they shop it around and they find a sympathetic legislator who's going to bring it forward, goes to the committee, goes to the whole process. And I think South Dakota has a disadvantage in that y'all have like a super majority of really conservative Republicans. Like I think, isn't it like your state Senate has like, it's like 35 seats and like 30 of them are Republicans and 5 are Democrats. So like y'all want to talk about an uphill battle, like let's talk about South Dakota. And yet you have been largely successful in defeating a lot of these bills. So like in 2019, you beat, what was it, 1215? It was that bill. It was like that all encompassing bill that was like going to ban like marriage equality. And it was like going to, you know, promote conversion therapy. And it was going to ban gender marker changes, like all this stuff. And then HB 1057 was the one that would have criminalized transitional healthcare for trans youth. And yet you still beat these bills, which is amazing. So as I'm looking here in Texas towards what is coming our way in 2021, and as we, you know, now we're on the other side of the presidential election, someday we will be nearing the end of the pandemic. We're going to be focusing on issues again. And I'm afraid that we're going to be focusing on trans kids, again, in a negative sort of way, kind of what's your secret? Like, can you tell me, like, what do we need to do? Because South Dakota has been kicking all the butts, and I'm so proud of the work that you're doing. What do we need to be doing nationwide to follow the South Dakota model?
Oh my goodness. Well, South Dakota definitely has like an agenda that we stick to of just like these very conservative values in every way. And so we're definitely not, yeah, a testing ground is a really good way of putting that. We have so many different people who come together to organize and to continue taking the work where it needs to go to the legislature. And for me, where it all begins for me is organizing these on the ground efforts, talking to people, being visible, having support from family, from friends, from strangers that you don't know, and then organizing, having marches, having protests. I know that the Transformation Project hosts a lot of phone banks and calling out and just saying, this is what's happening and we're not happy with it. If people don't know that you're a community that's unhappy with what's happening, or they don't know what's happening, or they don't know how to vote on it, then it's in South Dakota, they're going to vote, to push it on through. They need to know that there's a community that this isn't, this is not only a disservice, it's like active hatred, and it's actively hurting people, and it will continue to hurt people. And then, as you grow, it's hurting our children. And for a lot of the efforts that I have been seeing, especially with like the Transformation Project, it's moms. And moms are not, you don't mess with moms. They will.
I will cut you. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Do not mess with my kids. Exactly.
If I can't do it myself, I will form a team, and they will form teams. And that's really what happens. We form groups, and then those groups form groups, and we all come together, and we're all pushing forward and being really visible, being loud, telling people that we're here and we're listening, and this is what we need.
I love it, building those coalitions. So I hear that obviously the coalition of parents, like I have a friend who was a couple of years ago really fighting hard against Jeff Mateer was going to be appointed a federal judge, and he was, I'm sorry, I'm rambling because I've just got off track here, but Jeff Mateer was going to be considered to be a federal judge. He said some really awful things about trans kids. I think he said something that they were Satan's spawn. So my friend Sarah was speaking at this presser in DC, and it was, one head of, one organization, like, I'm the president of so-and-so, and I'm, chairman of the board of this, whatever. And then Sarah gets up and she goes, I'm just a mom, and here's how this would affect my kid, right? And guess whose comments went viral, right? The mom. So I hear this, and I know in Texas, we've had a lot of success by partnering with the business community, because I'm a businesswoman, like, this advocacy thing is kind of my side gig. Like, I'm really, like, the thing that pays the bills is I'm a small business owner. And I know the economic impact that these net bad bills, even talking about these bad bills, can bring such negative press to the whole state that conventions will pull out and whatnot. So have you also partnered with the business community in South Dakota? Have they proven to be good allies to y'all as well? Like, where are you building this coalition?
Yeah, we've recently started on the advocacy network reaching out to businesses in South Dakota and saying, will you support us? We started a project called the 141 fundraiser. And so you could donate between $1 and $141 to us to help us going into the legislative session. So
I donated to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So even if you donate $1, you're a business who is supporting, trans youth and a trans organization. And I just love that. I love that there are these like little safe places that you can find that are supporting us here in South Dakota. I live in Vermillion, South Dakota, which if you look at like the state of South Dakota in the election, there are a couple of blue spots. There's like the reservations, and then there's Vermillion. just a little tiny blue spot. And so that's where I live. And so it's actually, you know, I feel pretty lucky to be in this little community that is like, you know, more accepting and it feels safer. But from where I'm from, Rapid City, there, you know, it's kind of a toss up. You really have to ask and inform and share with them. And yeah, businesses can be powerful, especially in South Dakota, where a lot of it's rural.
Right. Right. Thank you. Thanks so much. Jay, I'd love to just talk about just like your totally normal life. Like you're just a dude, you know, like you like being outside, you know, you love your wife and your kids. You know, we've heard a lot of the panel thus far has been talking about the struggles of the trans community. And I certainly don't want to diminish that. At last count, there's at least 34 transgender people who've been murdered in the United States just this year, just the ones that we know of. And those are just some of the people that we'll honor on Transgender Day of Remembrance on Friday. And you know, I so often what we see in the media is often these negative stories, these hardships that the transgender community certainly faces. Certainly, I do not want to diminish that. And at the same time, I wonder, you know, if we heard more positive stories of the accomplishments of the trans community, of the, you know, these equal partnerships and healthy relationships that trans people can find themselves in, you know, I think for myself as a parent, obviously I get a lot of parents coming at me like, I think my kid might be trans. What do I do? I'm scared for their future, right? Not that they're scared of having a transgender child, but a lot of times they're just really scared that by, you know, giving them space to transition, that it will somehow diminish their prospects for the future, right? And what I tell them, I'm like, look at Max, look at Stella, look at these Genderqueer Champions, like they're amazing. Like my friend Jay, he's married and he's awesome. So if you could just kind of tell us, like, just like how totally normal are you, dude? Like tell us more about your life and your, you know, and also I'd like to hear more too about like how did your family sort of transition with you? Like I know that I'm a much different person today than I was 5, 6, 10 years ago when Max at the age of 2 said that he was a boy, right? I'm a much different person today. So if you could also talk about your family's perspective and how they sort of, for lack of a better word, sort of transitioned along with you on your journey. I'd love to hear more about that.
Definitely. I wouldn't know how normal I am. No, I mean, I think I do live a pretty normal life. Transitioning, you know, personally was difficult, me getting there. But once I finally have come to terms with who I am and stuff, I mean, it's pretty good. Like my wife, we met whenever I was just a butch lesbian, you know, and so you know we got together and I asked her one night, you know, would you still love me if I was a man? And to my surprise, and the first time anybody has told me yes to that question, and she said, yes, of course, you know, whatever makes you happy. And I was like, wow, you know, because I've asked that question in the past before and, you know, don't get that, never received that response, you know. And so I was like, okay, cool, you know, she's a pretty cool chick. and and so, you know, kind of went on where, you know, she told me that I, you know, needed to seek out some counseling to kind of work through, you know, my questions about my identity and all this and that. And this is when we were living in Allen. And so I go see a counselor, and that counselor, you know, tells me that I needed to love the body God gave me. So then that put me, you know, it's like, wow, okay. So counselor told me this. So I just kind of put it on the back burner for a little while, you know, start thinking, you know, just thinking to myself. And we ended up moving to North Texas here in Sanger. And that's whenever I started. I went to school at TWU, and I started seeking counseling through the school, which is amazing. So if anybody goes to TWU and they need counseling for whatever they've got, or they did when I was there, really great staff. Anyway, my counselor helped me tremendously. I mean, I was struggling with, you know, my identity, my sexuality, all this stuff. And what was amazing is my wife, she stood by my side through it all. I mean, she even, you know, the kids too. I remember whenever my youngest stepdaughter, I think she was, I want to say about 12, 11 or 12 maybe. And Carrie sat both the girls down and told them, you know, Jay is transgender and explained to them what transgender was. And, just kind of asked them how they felt, and, that being her kids and everything, she asked them, if this is something y'all can't handle, you need to let me know. And the youngest one, and she said, why would we turn our back on Jay when he needs us the most? And I'm just like, oh, that's beautiful. And the oldest one too, she was very curious and should ask questions and stuff. And they've always stood by my side. They've been, huge supporters of me and my wife. And I mean, they're wonderful. And even my oldest stepdaughter, she's the one who has my two grandbabies. And she's told my wife, asking, did I want to let Tommy, my youngest grandson, whenever I'm ready to talk about it, they're totally cool with it, whenever he's old enough to, he's 2.5, so not anytime soon. But, I mean, they're very open, very loving. I mean, it's been a wonderful experience for me.
That is so good to hear. And I want to lift up more stories like that, more, like you are a hardworking family man with a loving, supportive family. That's not to say that every transgender person's experience is that way, but honestly, that's not going to be the same for every cisgender person either. And I think it's really important that we lift these types of stories up. And so I'm really grateful that you're here today and sharing that story. And I want to transition now into the whole the talking about visibility, right? There's a question on here, actually a comment from a viewer that says, another piece of the puzzle is to be visible. It's hard to hate someone that you know and love on a personal level. As we live our authentic life, they have a harder time buying into the stereotypes and fears. And that ties into a question that I had kind of wanted to ask the panel just broadly. Despite the multiple, nearly countless attacks on the transgender community from the Trump-Pence administration over the last 4 years, this is me speaking as a privileged cisgender person. And yet I'm also deeply invested because it affects my son, right? So I have a somewhat of an insight, and yet I'm not trans. So I just want to put an asterisk on this, right? It seems to me that despite the numerous attempts by the outgoing administration to erase the transgender community, that the trans community has still thrived. The resiliency is clearly there. And it seems to me that the cultural acceptance of trans people has really has been much more accepted in our culture than it was even 5 years ago. So when my son transitioned in 2015, Jazz Jennings' show wasn't out yet. The American Academy of Pediatrics hadn't put out their best practices with working with trans kids yet. There was believe me, I looked everywhere for info on trans kids and it didn't exist 5 years ago. So we were winging it, right? And then these conversations that we have with people, I have to explain to people no, he knows his gender identity the same way that your first grader knows theirs, And so it seems to me today that we're not talking necessarily about should trans people exist? It's hard to hate up close, right? Once you know and love someone who is trans, it's really, you have to change. I would hope that you would really change your perspective on this. So I guess, I'm not the panelist. I'm going to step back and actually ask the question now. I'm so sorry. I just get on my soapbox. Do you feel also that the trans community, despite these attacks, has continued to make progress? Do you feel like we've stepped back in some ways? And talking about the visibility, do you feel that there are more out and public trans people today than there were 4 or 5 years ago? That was a really long question because I just got on my soapbox, so please excuse me. So I guess Stella, do you want to start first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that my mom was in a very similar situation as you. I transitioned when I was in 4th grade, so just a little bit longer. Well, actually, I kind of was out when I was 2 years old-ish, right? Similar to Max, I already was expressing my gender identity, and it was a lot more fluid than I express it now. I would say that if I back then, if I had known a little bit more, and if there was more information out there, I might identify as gender fluid. But now I just am a girl, which I'm also A-okay with. But there was nothing out there. And so we tried our best to become that family. We did our best, and we shared our story as often as we could with as many news sites as we could, even now. And the Gender Cool Project is fantastic for that, because it really is, it's national, and ours is a little bit more coastal. And I think that what also helped us is that we are a white, hetero appearing family, and we're white, which is really important, and that really helps our story get lifted up. And I don't think that I would be here today if I wasn't white, and if I was a BIPOC, or if I was a person of color. And I don't think honestly that Gavin might not even be where he's been at this point if he was BIPOC. I think that Gavin and I, and even Jay, are really fortunate to be white people. And I think that also is really important when we're talking about visibility and queer visibility, because we hear so often about we hear so often about white queer people. And we've also seen a lot of killings of Black transgender women too. And also Black transgender women have been erased from the queer textbooks as well. Marsha P. Johnson, right? There are so many other Black women as well throughout history that have started so many things that we think the white women have. And I think that that's something that is really important when we're talking about visibility, period. And, in this context, white or queer visibility. And so, yeah.
That's great. Thank you for so much. I think that aspect of talking about your privilege, I think, is really, really powerful. I'm really glad that that you're able to articulate that so well. It's like such a young age. My goodness. Thank you. I guess who would like to go next? Anyone have like a burning thought on this concept of visibility and whether or not the trans community has continued to make progress despite the attempts to erase y'all over the last half decade specifically, but I guess more broadly, as what Stella was saying too, about how so many Black and Indigenous and people of color, the voices of queer people of color have been erased. I have some general thoughts about all of this visibility and honoring the ancestors.
Yeah, I'll talk briefly on that then. So being 37 years old, I didn't grow up in a time where, now it's almost like it's normal for trans youth to be outspoken, and like I wonder if it has anything to do with, let me try to gather my thoughts, like them feeling that it's okay to be who they are at such a young age and understand, oh, well, this is what I'm feeling, this is who I am. And I find that amazing because growing up, was born in the 80s. And so growing up during that time, transgenders were not really talked about. And if they were, it was not a good conversation at all. And so now seeing, I have a lot of, friends, or I see people, and I mean, it's totally normal. Like, it's amazing. That's basically what I was saying.
Yeah, so I'm only slightly older than you. I was born in the 70s, but the late 70s. But I also, growing up in the 80s, like we kind of as a nation were taught that the lives of gay men were not worth saving, right? I mean, the AIDS crisis like tore through that community, and a lot of really beautiful lives were lost because we didn't, as a country, value those lives, which is heartbreaking, right? And then in the 90s, so we're the same age, roughly. Remember Pat on Saturday Night Live?
Oh, yeah.
God, like how horrifying that I found that hilarious in the 90s. Like they made a freaking movie out of Pat. And for those of you who are not old enough to know what Pat is, don't bother. There's going to be YouTube videos on there. Don't bother. But it was this very gender fluid character. And like the whole punchline was that we as a country didn't know if Pat was a boy or a girl, as if you could only be one or the other, right? And it was just like, it was horrifying, right? So I hear you, Jay, like this is what we and our generation kind of grew up with. And I hear what you're saying now about trans youth coming out more and more. I despise the word transgender, despise that word, because I think really what's happening is it's this visibility. All y'all here today as panelists opening up these spaces for us to have these conversations. So children can speak with their parents and spouses can speak with each other, you know, I think, and I think that's, for me, that feels like progress. Again, I'm not a panelist, I'll shut up. Okay, so Gavin or April, do you have anything you want to tie into this? What are your thoughts?
I did just want to acknowledge. I mean, I think that of course, when you have a legal landscape that is, for example, majority conservative in the courts, in the House, and the Senate, whoever, wherever you're waging this battle at the time, especially when you're talking about legal battles levied against the trans community, like so many of the bills in South Dakota and across the nation that have targeted trans youth, trans people being able to be fired from their jobs or whatever the conversation is. Every time one of those bills is defeated, it works both ways. It still sets the legal precedent for that particular conversation that says, look, you've already tried to make it illegal for trans kids to use the correct bathroom, and they've already decided that that's not constitutional. So it emboldens our side of things, the progressive side of things. Every time one of these losses happen in court, it shouldn't have to be that trans people endure attacks on their humanity, on their rights, on these sorts of things to gain any of that ground. But for all of these horrible, terrifying attacks on trans rights and freedom and happiness and liberation, every single time those things are defeated and struck down, that sets, it sets it's progress. It's progressive, positive legal precedent, and we still will be probably fighting these same fights for years and years and years to come in different states, and they'll reword it and try to loopholes and this and that and the other. It's still a long fight ahead of us, but again, for every horrible, nasty bill that seeks to criminalize being ourselves, when those bills rightly are struck down, that is us still inching forward despite that nasty horribleness. And that's important to mention as well, that these attacks on trans people have also been examples of trans resistance and resilience and power in response.
Thank you so much. That's really powerful.
And I think also, going back to the I-1616 initiatives that happened here in Washington State, it was really difficult to get a lot of people to come out, because sometimes progressives have a hard time getting their poop in a group. And we've experienced this sometimes here in Washington. I don't know about other places, but it just has been really difficult because we're not all on the same page either. And I think it's really important that we are. And I just, what Gavin said just really made me think that, and I just want to acknowledge that as well.
Thanks, Stella. April, do you have some thoughts on visibility and progress of the trans community?
Yeah, I think that in so many ways we're so much more visible, and we're more outspoken because we're finding more of our people. Social media has really changed that for us so much. We know that we're not alone. It's not just us here, especially here in the middle of the country. And so it's made us more comfortable to be able to be more outspoken. But I also think it's just, we're just people. Like I am a two-spirit person. I don't feel like I need to change my physical body in any way. And so I'm really privileged in that way. And I also want to present myself in whatever form I want to present myself. If I want to wear a dress, I'm still a two-spirit person, and I still use they them pronouns. And I felt before like I really needed to look very androgynous, or like you couldn't tell what my gender was. And now, like, I don't want to have to change the way that I look so that other people will respect who I am. And so I think showing that sort of a spectrum as well, like I am very comfortable in my body, I'm comfortable with the way that I look, and I will present myself in whatever way I feel I want to, and I'm still two-spirit, and I still use they them pronouns. And so that representation in that way is also so important, and just like claiming that and holding that true to yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I see Stella like snapping. I love it. So riffing off of this last question, it sounds like it generally sounds like there's a general consensus among the panelists that despite it all, the trans, non-binary, two-spirit, gender fluid community continues to make progress on the front of equal rights, and cultural acceptance. Where do you see us going 10 years from now? Like what's your prediction if now it's 2030 or beyond? Like what do you see, what's in store for the trans community in the next 10 years? What are your hopes and what are your predictions? April, let's stay with you.
Oh man, I think that our youth now are going to be loud and out there, and I think that will really change. Maybe like in South Dakota, it won't change our overly Republican system, but I think people will be hearing the community a lot more. I think it'll be a lot more difficult to bring those bills around and think that it's going to be okay, or bringing 6 of them at one time, knowing that, maybe 1 or 2 will stick, isn't going to be the case anymore. I think it's really going to change the voices of the people.
Yeah, I hope you're right. I hope that as more and more trans people do come out and transition, obviously, like more of us are just going to know more trans people, and it's hard to hate up close. So I hope that that the more people that come out and feel safe in doing that, I hope you're right, April. I hope that will diminish the number of hateful bills that are being filed, and maybe instead of us working on the defense so often in South Dakota and here in Texas, we can maybe play offense, like maybe pass, like, I don't know, the Equality Act in Congress in 2021, just a thought. So yeah, so thank you. Gavin, how about you? What's your predictions for the next 10 years or beyond?
I think that the real sort of gold mine that we're looking at as far as progress goes is the inclusion of more trans people in politics. And that is, this has happened with our last election, with our latest election. Congratulations, Sarah Mcbride. There are more trans people elected on local levels now. I mean, we really have, despite it all, had a influx of trans people in politics, and by influx I mean like probably 10 people cumulatively, but that's like enough people that it really matters. I mean, it's a lot compared to none, compared to very few people. So the fact that I'm excited about the recent handful, I think that'll just keep building. I think as we get more trans people at all levels of elected office, we will see more progressive bills that are actually ensuring our safety for our future. I would very much like to see us evolve past a situation where we're giving credence to the both sides thing. I would love to see a world in the next 10 years where we stop pretending like Republicans who want to take away the rights of people to live freely. We stop acting like that's a legitimate position. We stop humoring them. We stop giving them the platform to spread that hatefulness. I mean, truly, to treat. I think trans people should be able to live and survive and be happy and supported, and I don't think that should be the case. As equal political stances worthy of similar discussion and consideration, I think is just ridiculous, and we should stop doing it right now. And I think I'm seeing a shift where we are stopping that so much as the position of trans equality becomes a more mainstream position. It's just we really I'm excited over the next 10 years to see how the conversation evolves away from pretending like that's a reasonable discussion to be having in the first place, where we can focus more on, no, trans rights are happening, are necessary, are appropriate. Maybe we can disagree on how to go about those things, not disagree on if they should be fundamentally, deserved to the individual as a concept. I mean, I would love to see in the next 10 years for us to evolve beyond discussing whether or not certain human beings deserve certain rights, and for us to stop humoring such a dialogue. We need to stop it and move on to the place where we say, no, they do deserve rights. How are we going to do that? And then we'll see. And with trans politicians at the helm and trans leadership at the helm, I really think we'll see that take off in a big way.
Yeah, excellent. So I just want to go back to your the point that you started off with first. We were talking about the number of transgender. We need more trans people in politics, right? So Sarah Mcbride, awesome, like highest elected official, openly transgender in the nation. She's certainly not the first one. We've got Danica Rome in, is it West Virginia or Virginia? One of the Virginias, somewhere out there. Danica's awesome. I also want to lift up Mauree Turner, the first out non-binary lawmaker, non-binary, Black, queer, femme, Muslim, first elected non-binary lawmaker in the country, elected in Oklahoma. I think that is remarkable. So progress, 100%. Yeah, right there. I love it. And they often say I'm following them now on Twitter. They often say nothing about us without us. Absolutely. Yeah. Jay, how about you? What's your prediction for the next 10 years and beyond, your hopes?
Well, let's see, I think they said previously very well. But probably my biggest hope is that they will quit discussing what we're doing in the restroom.
It's like all of a sudden trans people have just discovered what a bathroom is. Like, right. Like now we're pissing next to trans people. Oh my God! Like, yeah. Come on.
That is my biggest hope, is that will no longer be a topic, because it's ridiculous. We go into the bathroom to do what everybody does in the restroom. So drop it,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, I really do see, I'm really hopeful with this new election and president, and having so many trans and non-binary people in politics now, and with our younger generations growing up, and like they're a lot more vocal, and there's a lot more awareness, and so I'm really hoping that it's going to move into a more positive direction.
Yeah,
very hopeful.
Yeah. Stella, how about you?
Oh man, I'm so glad that Gavin brought up Sarah Mcbride. She and I met a few years ago, and we were instant friends. And I remember talking to her about we eventually were just going to compete as to who was going to be the first transgender president. And so it was going to be either her or me. We were okay with both. And I am just so proud of her. And when I found out that, or when I learned that she was elected, I was just so ecstatic. I mean, she and so many others are they are my future, and they are the reason that I will be, and that Gavin will be, that we will all be huge change within hopefully less than 10 years. I really hope that a lot of changes happens in less than 10 years, because what's really important is that change needs to happen now. We have been suppressed for too long, and we are still fighting when we really shouldn't be. We're still fighting, which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
And it's just I really hope that this most recent election really helps, and it really creates a lot of change, because we have needed it and we still need it. And So yeah, that's my opinion.
No, I love it. I feel I hear what you and Gavin are saying too about like why my son's constitutional rights are not up for debate. Full stop. He is an American citizen with the same rights as any other American deserves in this country. And I'm tired of debating whether or not he should have those rights, and I'm ready to move forward on how do we protect those rights. And I think what you all have been saying about, April, you're talking about coalitions, we're talking about visibility, Gavin's talking about representation in government, we're talking about this progress that the trans community has made. You all being here on Facebook Live, I mean, this could go viral, and I hope it does. I want your voices to be amplified. Like, this is how we continue to push this forward, because I am tired of fighting for Max's constitutional rights. I'm just done debating that. And it angers and infuriates me that I have to spend so much time as his mother worrying about that when I just want to worry about, his grades in English, right? Or math. Like, come on, give me a break. One of the questions from a while back was just, there were a couple of questions about basically like, how can families and communities support you? How could being an ally, let me back up. Being trans is not a choice. It is who you are. Being an ally is absolutely a choice. It is work. It is a verb. You got to work on it every day. So how can the community and your family or your work, whatever it is, be better allies to you so that we can continue to work on this progress? And Jay, I'd like to start with you because you really do have a very, steady job, solid family, good foundation. Do you feel like that has helped you be a better man, a better advocate, and what would you like to see for other trans people when it comes to that support that they need, or what support do they need? Yeah.
I think, just being loving and open and not being hateful. I've had a lot of support. My parents are amazing. It's a transition for them as well. And, I had to give them their space to do that. But I never for a second thought that they were going to stop loving me. And so that was amazing. And my sister, same thing. She's my best friend, and so having support like that, has been just huge. And even, sending the link for this here to, friends that I haven't spoke to in years, but sending it off to them. And, I'm getting such positive response back saying, oh, I can't wait to watch it. That's awesome, and, this and that. And so just having that support, it's just, I mean, it's amazing. And I think if whenever people want to talk to you or come out, it's important to listen to them. Try not to be judgy of them or closed-minded, and participate in things like this when they send stuff. This is a way of showing, hey, I care enough about you to take a couple hours of my day to sit and listen to what you and other people have to say, because I'm interested. You're interesting to me, just as a human being, not just because you're trans.
Right.
But yeah, I think just being loving, supporting, and just being there, just be human, be kind. That's what I try to live by.
Great, thank you. Gavin, how about you? What are some ways that the community can just show better support? What is it that the trans community needs right now from their families, from their jobs, from their local city councils, their school boards, whatever it is? What is it that we need to be doing as allies to help the trans community to push you along the way to continue to make this progress?
One thing that I think that the trans community really does need from people who position themselves as allies is a more proactive approach to educating themselves and others about trans issues. Often what tends to happen is that a trans person has to face harm from individual, explain why that was wrong, and then they say, oh, I'm so sorry, and you've helped me, you've taught me, I'll evolve, I'll change my language. And that's great that they're willing to do that, but I shouldn't have had to have you say some horrible comment that gave me some kind of dysphoria in order for you to know that it was wrong to say. I think that people who position themselves as allies don't do enough of their own work, of their own heavy lifting, and rely too much on allowing trans people to educate them rather than doing that work themselves. I mean, of course, you should be listening to and learning from trans people, but not, you need to be finding resources that are already there, that are already made by trans people, for people who are looking to understand us better. You know, keeping mindful about the language that you use at large around anybody. I mean, when you're talking about, for example, pregnant people, using pregnant people. I have a uterus. I could be pregnant. I'm not. But I'm involved in that conversation, so when you're having conversations around trans people, or even if you don't know that these people are trans around you, using inclusive language just in every aspect of your life, taking it upon yourself to look up certain aspects of the history of the trans community, the significance of certain things. Again, the conversation always goes, well, I made a mistake and I'm sorry, you can't expect me to be perfect. And I agree with that. That's totally fine. We're all human. But if your version of allyship looks like, I love and support trans people, but I make mistake after mistake after mistake and don't ever at any point take the time to educate myself as to why I might be this far off base with my language, with my interactions with trans people in my life, you're not doing the work yourself. You're relying on trans people to suffer harm and then correct you. I think that cis allies need to do a whole lot more work educating themselves and calling out transphobia where they see it in the wild as well, so that trans people aren't always the one that have to do the mitigating and say, whoa, that was really messed up for you to have just said that to me, so that maybe some cis ally did that work before we even got there. I hear all the time, well, I'm still learning and this and that and the other, and that's fine. We're all human. But the harm that you cause with that kind of ignorance is still harm. And it is absolutely up to you as the individual ally, as the individual person who is not trans, to learn how to interact with trans people in your community. And not doing so is not a very simple, like, whoopsie, I dropped the ball on that. It's an act of transphobia in and of itself, and it's not good allyship. Rather than asking, is this an appropriate thing to say to a trans person? Well, maybe you should figure that out, look that up, listen to what trans people have said about these issues. I just think, generally speaking, people rely too much on trans people to do free labor all the time just because they exist. I position myself as an educator, both in my career, or my time as a trans advocate, but also because I want to teach middle school English. And so I spend a lot of time, in that role, doing the educating type thing. And I that's the position I'm in, and I'm kind of uniquely, committed to being in that space. But it still does wear on me when I have to, again, educate somebody so that I can have space in a room, so that I can step in and be safe. And that's not safety. That's not support. I think, generally speaking, if you think you're a good ally, but you've never taken it upon yourself to look these things up, to research what it means to be trans, to listen to trans people directly without going to them for free labor about, like, hey, can you tell me all about being trans and what it's like and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to monopolize hours of your time, and I will probably ask embarrassing questions during this period of time, and you're just going to have to deal with it as a trans person, because I need to be educated. I know it comes from a good place and genuinely wanting to learn, but you have to recognize what burden you're putting on the individual to have to sit there and run through Trans 101 when they just want to live their lives, to be themselves, to be seen as who they are. In particular, in, like, Stella mentioned, a teacher that had questions for her, and it's great that the teacher felt like she could ask those questions for whatever reason, but you were a kid and that wasn't your job. That should have been a safe space for you already. It shouldn't have been something that you had to, and I experience that all the time, and it really gets exhausting for your personhood as a trans person to be seen as a commodity for cis people to consume. And really, you know, a trans person who chooses not to do a drop of education in their entire life is so valid. They owe nobody nothing. And for the people who still have the energy to do it, you know, rock on, it's awesome, because it takes a lot out of you to be in that educator position all the time, constantly. So I would say, if you position yourself as an ally, and you hear this and I'm saying, have you ever done your own research? Have you ever read any books, any, not just the, ones that like Netflix will, not the movies that Netflix will put out that, whatever. There's so many conversations about like corporate pride and all that. But the history, the text, the things that like the books that I might have found when I first transitioned. There was like 2 of them, it's things like that. It's just like, you could do more to take it upon yourself so that you don't make these mistakes to the face of a trans person who then has to suffer your harm. And people don't understand that oh, I just made a mistake, I'm still a lovely person and I still support trans people. That's all well and good, but I'm sorry, if you're not doing the work yourself to make sure you're mitigating the harm you're causing to trans communities, you're actually not being a good ally. And that should be seen as a call to action rather than as a personal attack. If you are a good ally, then that is a call to action rather than an attack on your character. And you should recognize your position as a person with privilege within the system to educate yourself so that you don't cause harm to the community inadvertently.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, there is so much trans 101 out there. You can find it. There are books, there are zines, there are people who do have the space to educate. I think there are probably TED Talks on it. You just look it up and you find it. It's very easy, and then go from there. In my culture, if you're going to ask for something, you give something. So if you are gonna, can I buy you dinner and can we talk about this? Give something. If you're going to take something, it's energy. It's not easy.
I love that. Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, like, broad question of the support that the trans community needs?
I mean, pretty much everything that
yeah, right?
like right on point. So
I know I'm sitting over here, I'm like, this is amazing. Keep going. Fantastic. I love it. Stella, let's talk about allies in action. We were supposed to ask allies in action. Tell me about that.
Well, so it's a after school group that my mom started, and it's really important because it's based in elementary school, because a lot of the foundational, majority of foundational personalities happen in elementary school. And so her project has been to make people an ally and allies overall. And it's against bullying. It's like an anti-bully thing, and anti-bullying group that she started. And it's really important for this conversation because what she's found is that a lot of her students also identify as queer, not just transgender, but also queer, which is really amazing. And because of what her work has done, it's really important. It's been really important. It has been really vital to so many students. And I made so many queer friends through it. And so what's also just so fantastic is, I think that it's an important reminder of parents to educate your children. Like, educate even if they are cis and het, right? You have to educate them. It's really important that they understand and know what transgender is, and queer and BIPOC, and like everything important in the world. And so that's been some of the work that Allies in Action has been doing, and it's just part of what it's just really powerful and really important. And I think that it gets to the point. Parents, you really need to educate your kids, because you don't know until you talk to your kids, right? My parents educated me about queer and transgender because they were like, you're probably trans, but we're not going to explicitly say that because maybe you're not. you know? And so it's just really important because it also creates this acceptance in your household. I'm very close to my parents. Like, I love my parents and I love talking to them and I really enjoy that. And that's because they've created an environment where I want to and where I feel safe to say anything. You know, I've said some things that were really ignorant that I didn't know were ignorant. And my parents were like, hey, let's not say that. Right. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Because that's really important to have. And it's a really important relationship that you can create yourselves. And so, yeah.
That's great. So Alice in Action, I just want to be clear, that is a program that's in schools?
It's a program through my mom's nonprofit group, My Purple Umbrella.
My Purple Umbrella. That's great.
Yes.
So could you post that link in the chat box, and we'll have the ushers post that too. So then that way people can get tuned in with that. I also want to mention too, there's a great program through the Human Rights Campaign called Welcoming Schools. It's for any teachers, educators out there looking for resources on this, it's just welcomingschools.org. There's a bunch of like lesson plans you can download and a list of books, and it's fantastic. They have facilitators who can come on in and teach these units, because it's one thing to like have the materials, but it's another thing to like know how to present it all, right? So your next like staff development day, maybe approach your superintendent or your PTA or whatever and see if you can like bring those facilitators to your school. And it's this anti-bullying campaign that starts, I believe it's K through 6, though they're looking at expanding it to the upper grades as well. And it's a really fantastic program, welcomingschools.org. So check that out. I see a comment here from an usher, by the way. It says we were having some issues. Part of the issue when we were trying to log in at the start was that the Facebook looked like it was asking for people's credit card information. So I just want to mention that an usher wrote, apparently there was some malware on the Facebook event page where it asked for people's credit cards. The UU Fellowship did not ask for credit card information. So if you entered your credit card, you got to contact your bank immediately and cancel that card. So if you've got to log off now for that, super sorry about that. You can come back later and watch the rest of this. We contacted Facebook immediately and the poster has been reported and banned. So just FYI about that. Who does that? Don't do that. Bad. So Gavin, I want to go back to what you were talking about with trans 101, right? The harm that it puts on trans people to be like, hey, can you tell me what that means? Like, I intentionally did not want to ask the question today, like, so when did you know, right? Like, it's so exhausting for me as the parent of a trans kid, hanging out with parents of only cisgender children, right? Because they're like, so when did you know? And like, I just kind of want to be in that space and like not have to talk about my kid's gender identity. Can we just like have a glass of wine and chill? So I intentionally did not want to ask that question today, and I'm intentionally going to continue to not ask that question. I want to ask the panelists, being transgender is not your only identity, right? Like, being cisgender is the least interesting thing about me. I imagine being trans is probably one of the least interesting things about you, maybe. So what is it that's super interesting or just like fascinating about you that you want people to know about? Like, Gavin, like, you have a tattoo of your cat. Like, that's pretty cool. Your cat is like really sweet and you love your cat a lot. Like, are there other things about you, panelists, that you just want people to know? How about, Gavin, let's start with you and your cat. I don't know.
Well, I totally get, when trans discussions happen, it oftentimes becomes a like you said, a space for cis people to ask all the stereotypical, so when did you know? Did you like play with boy toys? And like, expecting like a really binary, really straightforward journey that's like really stereotypical. It's like, look, there's several bad movies about that. Like, you can you can get your dose of like stereotypical, like, super binary. I was assigned female at birth, but from age, whatever, I liked trucks and hats, and and that's plenty of people's stories. I mean, honestly, my story is very kind of similar as aligned to that. I was always a very masculine child, and I still am, but you're right that sometimes it's nice to be able to engage in a space where where those things aren't necessarily on the table. And I will say that those conversations are fun to have for me as a trans person, but typically not in a cis audience. I talk about my transition and my gender journey with trans people pretty much exclusively. That's when it's fun to talk about, because they'll ask questions that don't suck, actually, and things like that. And it's a relatable experience rather than sort of a peep show of the trans life. And so those conversations can be totally fun to have under the right circumstances, definitely. But for me, those circumstances tend to be with other trans people. Now, I will say, though, that my identity as a trans man is one that is very important to me, and it's one that I lead with. And so I would say that being trans is one of the most interesting things about me, because I think it's really, really cool that I'm trans. Hell yeah, I'm trans. In your face, I'm trans. And I think that's awesome. I think that's so awesome. I would never trade, my experience as a trans man for anything. There's not for nothing, for no reason at all. I love being trans. But it's not the most interesting thing about me. It's one very interesting thing about me. It's not the most interesting thing about me. I think in part because my life centers around trans discussion so often, with what I do, in supporting myself in trans education and things like that, but also in my career goals. Part of my motivation to be a teacher, quite frankly, is to be a visibly trans teacher, is to be the kind of person that can show my children, my students and any children I may have, that there's a future for them where they're just themselves in adulthood and living a great life and having a great time. It ultimately is something very central to my life, but there's many things that that don't involve that necessarily. Different things that I'm into, things that I like. My cat being one of the things in my life that has nothing to do with my transness, but she's behind me under my chair right now, so I can't get a hold of her. But I'm obsessed with my cat. I adore my cat. I would talk about my cat for hours and hours. She means everything to me. She's my little buddy, but also I have other passions. I mean, I like politics in general a lot. I'm really passionate about many different intersections of politics. And one of my shirt right now, my shirt says "Bail is ransom," because it is. We should end cash bail right now. But anyway, it's a whole other tangent. Politics I has such a deep place in my heart, and most of those things don't involve trans politics directly. Of course, when you're talking about the intersections of trans identity and other aspects of the criminal justice system or the legal system or whatever, it always does have to do with trans people. But now that I'm kind of thinking about it, I'm kind of trying to think about, what is cool about me that has nothing to do with trans stuff? Because honestly, a lot of it kind of ties back in. I mean, really, it's just the mundane, my interests. Like when I'm not dealing with the trans things, I like to draw and write, and I like music, and I like anime, and I like I like people so much. I love, just getting to meet people from other walks of life and with perspectives that I don't have. And, but honestly, I have to say that when it all comes down to it, my life is so immersed in transness and trans politics and trans life and beauty that I really circle back to it a whole lot. And I personally love that. I really do love that.
So I really appreciate that answer, and I recognize now that my question was very weighted and slanted into my perspective, right? So thank you. That's fantastic. So I went to Gender Odyssey, not this last year, it was canceled, the year before I presented there, and Aiden Olson Kennedy, fantastic transgender man, wrote, "Oh, there's your kitty. Hi,
My baby. Oh, he said, "Get away from me."
He's got this great talk called "Just a Boy, Just a Girl," and so I just want to my question was coming from my space, being the parent of a young transgender child, spoke his truth when he was 2, was able to transition when he was 6, almost 7. And so for my kid, that's not central to his identity, right? Because
Right.
he's just a boy. And I think
Right.
Dr. Kennedy's presentation focused a lot on that trans youth that's not really necessarily central to their identity. And when they get older, when they start seeing what that means for their lives, they may, dating, getting a job. Of course, the Supreme Court now has, said you can't fire someone because they're trans, but there's a lot that's wrapped up into that trans identity that right now he doesn't have to navigate because I'm navigating it for him. So I appreciate that answer because I was asking it from my perspective as a cisgender mother of a younger trans child. So thank you for that. Was a really very thoughtful answer. I love it.
Well, and I that kind of leads me to a point that, and I'll try to be quick about this. I've known many children who have transitioned young, and then when they got into and who, for them being trans, didn't carry a heavy cultural component or anything that was really that important in their lives, other than that it was just a step that they had to take to be able to be who they
Mm-hmm.
were. Um, but then as they get older, as they enter their teens, they begin to desire and seek that community, because the thing is, uh, trans people have a culture. Our community has a culture. We have a history. We have a rich background and experience. That if you're a cis person, for example, raising a trans kid, you might not necessarily be equipped to introduce them to. And all too often, I see trans kids not get the benefit of being taught their history or their culture, quite frankly, because if you're a cis person, you don't necessarily have the type of access that you would need to do that well. Although, I think, again, there's many ways in which cis allies can do better and should do more of the heavy lifting. But I have to say that, especially for the young trans children, feel as though it's not a big part of who they are and it's not a big deal, they may very well feel that way for the rest of their life, and that's a wonderful thing. But I've seen so many people realize that there's a culture and a community out there that they hadn't had access to, appropriate access to, and they want to get more involved all of a sudden. And all of a sudden, it really does matter to them if they're trans. I'm sorry, my cat's playing in a bag, if y'all can hear it, and it's a little loud. But so I want to, I guess this is my urge to anyone who might be listening who has a trans child. Their culture is extremely important to them. It's important that they have the ability to access it. Whether your kid cares much or not, at whatever stage and age they are, it should still be an ongoing conversation in the household, so that they can see examples of trans leadership, trans adulthood, trans life and love and joy. And so, I totally respect those people who feel very much like just a boy, just a girl, just a person. And for them, the culture and the identity of being trans is not significant. And that's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But too often, trans youth don't have the benefit of having access to those things to find out maybe it is a culture they want to be more involved in or want to know more about. So I had the obligatory mention of that all kids benefit from interacting with their culture to some degree.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin. I'm really going to continue to reflect on that answer after this is over. So thank you a lot. Yeah. I don't know who would like to go next. Is there something? I originally asked the question: is there something else about you that you want people to know about? And Gavin's like, hell yeah, I'm trans. Like, bring it. Here I am. Right. So I guess, how do you want to answer that question? Like, what is your identity? What is it that makes you really interesting that you want the world to know?
Well, I kind of, I'm sorry, my headphones stopped working.
It's
So
all good. We can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you just fine. It's fine.
fantastic.
Yep.
But I think, for me, and Gavin's answer was just beautiful. For a while, I was saying that my life is pretty incredibly uninteresting, because for me, being trans is such a thing that's behind me, actually. Like, that's not something that I mean, like, I'm totally into it. I love that I'm trans. Good for me. I'm glad that I can be myself. But that's not exactly something that defines who I am. And that's not how I think of what defines who I am. And I know that for a lot of my friends, it is. They love being out and proud, and I mean, and I love it too, but you know, in a different way, they really capitalize their identity on being trans. And I try my best not to do that. And maybe that's just because of how I've been educated and how I've told my story, is that, you know, being trans for me is not what defines me. And so I think, I mean, and I tell my friends sometimes, like, I was like, yeah, I am part of the gender, like a national storytelling campaign, and we debuted on a you know, on a national television thing, and they're all like, whoa, you're so amazing, you're a star. And I'm like, am I though? Because I'm living in a 1-story house and I'm like the only one. I'm like an only child and a middle-class family. My dad owns a small business, and like, it just doesn't feel like my life is that interesting. And you know, I don't know. I think, I guess something that I would like people to know about me, I'm an incredibly good violinist. I like to think I've been playing for like 6 years now, I think. I have no idea. And I just like to tell people that I'm into politics because I think politics are cool. And there's a lot of change that can be done in that area. And so, yeah.
I love it. Very different answers from you and from Gavin. I mean, I see a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of very different too. Very different. Clearly, trans people are just not one uniform block, right? Like, there's diversity in the trans community. So I love the diversity of those answers. Jay or April, either of you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. I'll kind of piggyback with Stella there, because like being trans is important to me, like personally, but I'm really like at work. Nobody knows, you know, anything. You know, go to work, just one of the guys, you know, and it's the first time in my life that I've been able to experience that, and that is, I find that, you know, it's liberating to me a little bit in a way, just being quote unquote normal. You know, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not saying that trans is not normal or anything, but you
No.
know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I find that I find that having other people who are very outspoken and stuff with transgender about being transgender is awesome. Like, I'm like, go, you know, because we need that as a community. And that's also why I'm doing this today, because it is very, you know, something very passionate to me. But it, like Stella says, it doesn't, you know, define who I am. I'm, you know, a husband, a dad, a grandpa, you know, I mean, you know, I work hard and come home and, you know, take care of my wife, and I've got 3 dogs and a cat, you know. But
Wait. Is this your trans agenda? I just want to be clear. Just kidding. Yeah.
yeah.
What's the trans
It's totally
agenda,
a
Jay?
trans
I want to know.
Yeah. So I mean, my life just seems very ordinary to me. You know, I love going, I like the outdoors. I love hiking and go kayaking and camping and stuff like that. Those are things that I would say define me more, you know, just being a family man.
I love it. So before we get to April, I just a reflection on, you know, just what you were just saying. When we went public as a trans inclusive family, I don't know, it was just a few months before the 2016 election. We just like suddenly just like burst onto the scene, and so everyone wanted to talk to Max because he was one of the first real public trans kids in the state of Texas, you know. And so this reporter, bless her heart, she was got on the phone with Max. We got her on speakerphone, and so she's like, so Max, like, so you're trans, like, what's that like for you? And he's like, and he really wanted to give a thoughtful answer. He's like, I like cats. Like, what is it what does it mean? Like, it's like, I'm just a kid, right? So it just, you know, what you said just reminded me of that story. He was just like, I don't, like, this question does not compute for me. Like, I'm just me, you know. So thanks. April, do you have any thoughts on this question? Is what, you know, what is it that really makes you interesting that you want the world to know?
Yeah, I mean, I relate a lot to Jay's answer. My daughter just came in holding her tooth that she lost just now.
Oh, yay! That's awesome. Tooth Fairy's
That's
coming tonight. It's awesome.
That's my main, like, there's,
Very cool.
but yeah, I mean, I think that I'm Indigenous, you know, and I try to be a visibly Indigenous person. I try to be an inspirational Indigenous person to other Indigenous people and mostly Indigenous youth. My kids are my inspiration for everything that I do. I feel like I need to live very authentically to show them that they can live authentically, and so they can see what that looks like, which does look very ordinary. You know, I think I also I work a lot on decolonizing my mind and myself and breaking down a lot of barriers of just why I don't feel like I often fit in this country, and there are good answers for that. There are real valid answers for that. And also just you know, I also feel the need to organize a march or a protest for every single issue in the whole entire world, and as it turns out, not everyone feels that way, which I'm also learning. And other than that, yeah, I am a mom, and you know, I take care of my kids when they lose their teeth later in a little bit.
Pretty radical stuff, April. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. So we're just about coming up on 2 hours. I'm so grateful. This is really this is a lot of work sitting here and talking about these big topics for 2 hours in front of a screen, and I'm just so grateful to everyone for being here today. Thank you so much. But before we wrap it up, I just have one more question, and want to kind of keep it a little bit brief so we can end on time. So this event has been sponsored by the Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. And so I find it only fitting that I would ask a question about faith and religion. I think oftentimes, not always, oftentimes religion is used as a weapon. It's weaponized against the LGBTQ community. Here we have tried to create a safe and welcoming and inclusive space to lift up trans voices. I'm sure that there are more things that you know, my church community could also be doing. So my question for the panelists is, what are some ways that faith communities and places of worship can be better allies to the LGBTQ community, and what, if anything, are they doing right, and what would you like to see more of? Very briefly, if you could. Sorry, it's a big question, but I'm like 30 seconds or less. Like, no, just kidding. Take a couple of minutes. But what do you reflect on when I ask that question about faith communities and allyship?
For me, it is a loaded question.
Yeah.
I don't, oh God, I don't have a specific religion that I relate to. I don't have a religious community. But I have this sort of inherent bias kind of against religious communities because of during my foundational years of finding out who I am, there was a religious-led initiative against me, saying that I'm an abomination and that I'm going to rape every single woman in a bathroom. Mm-hmm. And so I have this I kind of have this bias against, you know, more like, I just have this sort of a bias against a lot of religions, not all. You know, there are some really accepting religions, and I've met a lot of religious people who are super accepting. We have like in where I live at Tacoma, at Pride, there are like 4 tents with local churches. You know, like there are a lot of accepting churches. But for me, that's just a really difficult question because I don't really have a religious identity at all, and I don't put myself on one. But I just wanted, you know, that's how I feel about that personally, and I just wanted to throw that out there first.
Yeah, thank you. I've heard other people say that too when they go to a school board meeting and they see the Jesus fish on the back of the car and their heart just sinks, you know. And like, And that feels really sad to think that that, that symbol that's supposed to be about love and inclusion, I'm not Christian, but, Jesus bringing people in, that has been used as a weapon against the trans community. And I hear what you're saying with that, which is why I want to ask this question. And if you don't have an answer for that, that is okay. That is okay. But I just I want to recognize what you just shared. So thank you.
Yeah, for years I struggled with my, relationship with religion. When I was young, I grew up Catholic. We went to church every Sunday, and very, pretty strict Catholic church. And then, I got older, and I was trying to find a, religious community that I could fit in, because, part of me, it was all, it's something that meant something to me. And it honestly wasn't until I started going to Doof that I found my place, And unfortunately, I haven't been able to go as much as I work every weekend, but I know that they're always there for me whenever I need them, because there's been times where, my wife and I've, we've hit rough patches and stuff, and we go to service. And one thing I love the most about Doof is that, it's not just sitting there reading out of the Bible and things like that. They just tell these most amazing, upbeat, you know, stories that, and there's been times we go and it just feels like it was meant for me that day. Like, and so, I mean, I've sat there with tears in my eyes, a few times. And the same with my wife. I've seen her wipe her eyes because it touched us. And it's so open and loving, and we've got all different types of people there, and that's where I feel like I found my home when it comes to spiritual or religion, things of that nature. But because for years it's just all the hate that you see with some of the other religions, where you know gays are an abomination, or you see and hear all these terrible things, and I'm like, why would I want to be part of something that hates me?
Right.
And so that was really hard for me, trying to find my spirituality through that. But I finally found my place and my people. And so it's turned out pretty good.
Good. Good. We're glad you're here. I think it's something important to talk about too. The difference between being a queer friendly and a queer affirming church. I was just part of a Lutheran group on this past Thursday where we talked about that some churches can be queer friendly, like, oh, everyone's welcome, like all lives matter, right? But to be queer affirming, like, are you having, do you ordain, openly queer ministers? Do you have same-sex marriages happening in your main sanctuary, right? Like, what are some ways that we can bring in more queer representation and be affirming of that? And I think that the Denton Unitarian Universalist Fellowship has done a pretty outstanding job with that. So I'm glad that you feel so welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's about meeting a community where they're at instead of asking them to come to where you are. And I think we've been seeing that a lot with like the Black Lives Matter movement. It's not about all lives matter, because like it's about, some of us are fighting for our lives. There are so many people of color who are fighting for their lives, and that's where they are. And if you're not willing to go, and meet them where they're at, then are you being an ally? Are you uplifting these voices? Are you making space for them? And I think that is what is so scary about like churches and organized religion, is a lot of us don't believe that they are willing to meet us where we are. And yeah, I mean, like Stella said, I am also afraid of churches and I don't know, moving into those places or spaces and having having that safe feeling there, where you're supposed to be able to feel safe and feel vulnerable.
Yeah. Gavin, how about you? Is there anything that the faith communities are doing right? Anything you'd like to see change? I'm hearing a lot of hurt from Stella and April. Just some reflections on this.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely share the experience of hurt. I grew up in a Southern Baptist household. I mean, basically, my experience with Christianity was a conservative one. You know, the entire time that I identified as a Christian, which was only in childhood. It was as soon as I was sort of old enough to analyze the system of belief that I had grown up just being fed, and have these questions and things like that. I actually I started identifying as an atheist before I ever even came out in the first place. um, and I think one of the more frustrating things about sort of part of that journey that I encounter now, even as a trans person, is that so often I'll have a discussion with someone who is a person of faith, and they will assume that I left religion not because I have the ability to think critically for myself and identify what it is that I do or don't believe, but because the mean Christians hurt my feelings and I ran away and never looked back. And that's really frustrating, and I don't hear it talked about very often. The idea that my negative experiences in the church drove me away in a way that is not valid or comprehensive enough to satisfy their perspective of my non-belief. And ultimately, it just harkens back to this concept that I see very often from people that have faith, from faith leaders and in communities of faith, that I'm just a lost little lamb, and eventually I'll come home to Jesus and all that stuff. And I really reject that entirely, because I don't believe in any of that whatsoever. I'm fully in support of anyone who does, and that's beautiful. You do you believe what you want, that's totally fine. But the one of the more frustrating things that I deal with even now as an adult, who transitioned, over 6 years ago, basically, um, 7 years ago at this point, is just this perception, this misconception that it wasn't my critical thought process that led me to leave religion. It was, I got my feelings hurt and ran away, and if only I would listen. Not all of us are like that. Some of us are nice. Let me convert you. It's like, no, you have to realize you've just aligned yourself with the very people who you're claiming no one, not everyone is like. I feel like I find for some reason, when I no one would ever think it's appropriate to look at a Christian individual and say, have you ever considered keeping your heart open to the idea that you're just wrong and everything you believe is wrong? But if you're non-religious, all of a sudden, it's okay to say something like, just keep your heart open to Jesus, or things like that, as if that wasn't my entire journey. And so I will say, one of the things that I presently deal with, even in Unitarian or otherwise progressive faith environments, is that there is just a sense that because I'm trans and faced religious trauma, that is the source for my non-belief, rather than just respecting that I don't believe. And I think it does have a specific intersection with my experience as a trans person, because it typically follows that type of conversation. I mean, it'll be like, well, our congregation is very open and supportive of everybody, so how about you try ours? And it's like, no, you must have misunderstood me. That's, I'm not in flux, I'm not in development with that identity, I do not believe in that. It's fine that you do. But to rebrand it as supportive Christianity in order to still want to save my soul at the end of the day, I mean, you're still participating in that same system of harm that harmed me in the first place. And so I will say, I have many, many religious friends, many friends in the Unitarian Church. I've done many events at many, especially Unitarian churches. And no issues there whatsoever. But I sure wish that people would stop assuming that my LGBT centric religious trauma is the reason for my non-belief, and that they can't make it all better by inviting me to their congregation, which is different. So I would say that's one of the things that I face currently with, interacting with faith communities, that I think they really could do better, in just respecting where people are.
That's great. Thank you. Very thoughtful. I'm so grateful and just totally blown away, so honored that you all could be here and take some time out of your weekend, your free time to spend it with me. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored and to share your stories and your reflections. I'm really, really fantastic answers. And thank you to everyone. Thank you also everyone who tuned in. Please, this is going to be kept on the Denton UU Fellowship Facebook page. So, if you've got a friend who didn't get to see it today, go ahead and you can just click that share button and send that over to them, because I really want these amazing trans and two-spirit voices to continue to be heard throughout National Trans Awareness Week and beyond. We need to keep this conversation going, and what they shared today was just mind-blowing at times, and I really want the whole world to see it. So let's make this go viral. Also, I want to thank our ushers, Marissa Abbey and Shannon Ratliff, for gathering the questions and helping us in the chat section over here on Zoom, because we weren't seeing the Facebook live stream. So thank you to them. Thank you to Hal Gibbons. Big learning curve, Hal, for both of us trying to figure out how to do this, but you did it, and I'm really grateful to you for being our tech guru today. Everyone, make sure to mark your calendars for Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's on the 20th. It's every November 20th every year. I'm sure there will be many virtual events happening. I will post what's happening here locally here in Denton, Texas, which you can also join virtually. It's going to be sponsored by Outreach Denton and the University of North Texas Pride Alliance. So check back on my page, my Facebook page, and I'll be sharing that. And I think that's about it. So everyone, let's keep this conversation going in our own communities. This is really important work. So, be well and stay strong. And thank you, everyone who participated today. I'm so grateful. Thank you.